We keep on trucking with more clan collection reveals as we go to the depths of the ocean and to the highest clouds in the skies, as the next reveals rocks, and literally rocks. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today we once again have two new clan reveals for the upcoming clan collection reveals, and this time it goes towards Bermuda Triangle and Angel Feathers. And surprisingly enough, the Angel Feather one we knew is going to be reverse units, but the rock variant of Referaide is still debated if it's an actual reverse unit or not, because if we're looking at like in the personality wise of the unit, it's somewhat of a reverse, but it's not actually a reverse unit, but it does have the R term as it has rock, but it's heavily debated currently. We have to wait until like 6 months later if we actually are going to see a reverse unit for Bermuda Triangle. So far, we have to make do with Referaide rock, but we have yet to talk about the skill, so we don't even know if the term we have to make do is suffice, because maybe the card's actually really good, or maybe it isn't. Let's find out by first taking a look at the new Bermuda Triangle cards, because we have a couple of generic support as well as the new Referaide rock, which supports the Referaide engine, and of course we have the new Romeo reverse with a couple of Celestial cards which basically support the entire Celestial engine, but to some extent can also be seen as a generic 2 engine. But we of course are going to start off with the Bermuda Triangle cards, and we start off with this great one, which is Sparkling Soul Nikita. And Nikita has the effects, although when this unit is placed on the rearguard circle or put onto the guardian circle, costs Soul Blast 1 or more cards, and this unit gets power plus 5k and shield plus 5k until the end of turn for each Soul Blast 1 paid for this cost. If your Soul Blast 3 or more was paid for the cost, draw a card. So this is effectively either a very strong beater or booster, or a potential beefy shield unit, as it can easily be 15k, 20k, 25k, or even more, which is nice. And the way that this card works is that it's relatively flexible in that you can pay how much soul you can pay for it, and then there's also an extra benefit to it that it draws you a card, which is nice in any scenario, because either you call it and it draws you a card, so you somewhat cycle but you keep a body on the board, or you guard with it and then draw into potential more shield value that you're going to need to survive that particular turn. So overall, pretty decent card. Don't know if it's going to see play, because maybe you cannot pay the amount of soul that this card wants you to ask, but because it's very flexible, you can just pay it like with 1 soul. It's still 15k shield, which honestly is not that terrible. So who knows if it will see play, might or might not. Now if we move up to the grade 2, we've got a pretty nice grade 2, as we've got Courteous Beauty Seria, and Courteous Beauty Seria has the effect, although when this unit is placed on the Vanguard circle or rearguard circle, costs discard a card from your hand, look at the 3 cards from the top of your deck, choose up to 1 card from among them, put them into your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. This unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3, it gets plus 10k instead of plus 5k. So it's effectively a 15k attacker or 20k attacker that also allows you to tutor for new cards, aka in-hand fixer. Now, it doesn't guarantee the card that you need, because it still needs to be in the top 3, so you might end up with discarding a card and then getting a card that's actually worse than the card you just discarded. It's not that likely, but it can definitely happen depending on what you're discarding. It's a bit iffy, but at the same time, it's also deck filter, as long as, of course, you don't see free triggers on the top of your deck. But because of RNG, that will happen to some players, but overall I think it's a decent card. It can be played in any build because it's just generic consistency engine, as if you need a specific card to make your combo work, this is another way to basically tutor towards that card, or at least get faster towards the card, because you put the rest on the bottom of your deck, which means you just got 3 cards deeper into your deck, which means you're 3 cards closer to the card that you're looking for, which honestly isn't that bad, and it's also free, so I don't see any actual negative part about this card. And what you're discarding can also fuel certain engines if you have cards that interact with your drop zone, or maybe a card that has a drop zone effect. I don't know if Bermuda has access to those cards, but it's another thing to keep in mind. Now, that brings us, of course, to the main grade 3 and the actual selling point of this support wave for Bermuda Triangle, as we've got Detonate Singer Referaide rock. Now, before we're going to talk about her skill, we have to look back to the original Referaide and refresh our memories to understand the actual value of this card. So the original Referaide had a skill where she would rest herself during the main phase, and then she would generate force markers, and then counting the amount of rearguards on a force marker, you reveal the top cards of your deck equal to that number, and then triggers in the top card that you reveal, those will activate. So effectively you have main phase drive checks, so you don't lose out on the potential Vanguard pressure, because you get a drive check during the battle phase, during the main phase, even though you rest your Vanguard. But as a trade-off, all your rearguards on a force marker can attack. So you could potentially attack 5 times if you have 5 force markers. That's the whole gimmick of the Referaide deck. And because you could generate 2 force markers via that skill, you could have like 3 force markers on the very first grade 3 turn. And in the follow-up turn, you can have 5 or 6, depending if you just rewrote again. Now that we've refreshed our memories a little bit, let's take a look at this Referaide skill, as it has 2 effects, from which one is auto in hand. At the end of the battle that your rearguard attacked, if you have a Vanguard with Referaide in its card name and a rearguard in rest, basically the condition itself will fulfill for this condition because you just attack with the rearguard, so it is in rest. And all of your circles with rearguards in rest have a force marker, which basically means you need to attack with all your rearguards before you can activate the skill, or you have rearguards standing that are not on force markers. Cost, Counterblast 2, write this card as stand, rest all of your rearguards, and move all of your force marker to the Vanguard circle. So this is a potential Vanguard restander, because now you can attack with the Vanguard, and you already used the Referaide's main phase ability. There you had the drive checks, so you still had the value of an actual Vanguard attack, but that could come with much more drive checks, because something I forgot to mention is that the old Referaide reveals the top X cards equal to the amount of cards that have force markers, or maybe I did say that. My memory is a bit weird here. But basically, you could have like 5 drive checks during the main phase. And then on top of that, you could have this grade 3 that also then swings for twin drive beyond that during the battle phase. Now, it does mean that it will be the last attack, so you don't have any rearguards to pass the power on to, so your opponent can perfect guard, of course, but at the very least it still is a plus engine because you drive check more cards. You do lose this grade 3 from your hand, but you do get the force markers, so that's nice, and all the force markers goes to the Vanguard, so that means it's PG or bust. So if they don't have a PG, this attack will hurt, and because you already attack like 5 times with your rearguards, it means you're gonna lose out on quite a few cards, especially since you can like stack triggers on those. So that's a pretty nice engine. And yes, the Counterblast 2 cost is quite heavy, especially in V Premium, because there's not a lot of solid countercharge engine within Bermuda Triangle. There are, but they're not great. But we're gonna get to that in a moment here. It also has another effect, which is Auto and Vanguard Circle. At the end of your turn, remove all of the force markers on your Vanguard Circle, get an imaginary gift force for every 2 removed markers. So this basically means you're gonna slash your force markers in half. Now that sounds very, very bad, but actually this works very great in tandem with the original Referaide. The reason why is that the original Referaide wants to have the force markers on the rearguard circle to benefit the most of your skills. So this grade 3, moving them all to the Vanguard circle, is kind of counterintuitive, but because of her skill you can move them back to the rearguard circle, so you can reset the board the moment you rewrite back into the old Referaide next turn. Now again, you're still slashing it in half, which still sounds bad. But again, this still synergizes very nicely with Referaide, because Referaide's skill had the condition that you would generate 2 force markers as long as you have 4 or less. So the moment you had more, that part of the skill didn't really do anything. So you didn't really make any more force markers. Because of this card slashing it in half, you will always generate the amount of force markers you're going to need to flood the board with the amount that you're going to need. Because the number that you're going to need is 5, because you want to have 1 in every single rearguard circle. So if we do the math, the very first grade 3 turn, you write the old Referaide, you get 1 force marker, use the skill, you have 3, then you write into this grade 3, you have 4, slash in half, go to 2, next turn, you write into the Referaide, you have 3, use the skill, you go to 5, and bam, we are at 5. Next turn, or in the same turn, if you have to counterblast, you can write, you go to 6, slash in half, you have 3, and again, we go back 4, 6, and you keep doing it over and over and over again. So that part of the skill actually doesn't hurt as long as you can rewrite back into the old Referaide, and that's the whole game plan, because I don't really see you doing the superior ride if you cannot immediately follow up with an old Referaide, or just simply winning that turn when you're gonna do the superior ride. Now, the main issue with this card currently is the 2 counterblast cost, and that's very heavy investment because the original Referaide already costs a counterblast, which means it's a free CB combo which you cannot view constantly. Like, if you can generate the counters, maybe you can do it 2 turns in a row, but that's very demanding, and of course your opponent can damage deny you. Now, that's where, to me, the value of this card lies. Because this is honestly quite a huge bomb if you know your opponent doesn't have a perfect guard. If they don't have a perfect guard, it's very unlikely that they can deal with this, because it will be like easily 40, 50 free K attack that then comes with the twin drive that comes from after, like 5 rearguard attacks that's probably ask like 15k shield each. So guarding this after that is gonna be tough. But yes, your opponent can deny you the counterblast, but that's where the fun part comes into play with the Referaide deck. Because the Referaide deck can generate an insane amount of value because it can just go +4 or 5 every single turn for 1 CB while multi-attacking with 5 attacks on the rearguard circle. That all does it for 1 CB. So if your opponent decides to counterblast deny you, to not allow you to do the superior ride, you could just slowly just whittle down the resources and you gain all the resources because of the original Referaide having an insane amount of resource engine while multi-attacking. So that's not really a good valuable option for a counter strategy. And then in a scenario they start rushing you and they actually give you the excess amount of counterblast, then you can throw this bomb on top of everything else to go even more harder onto your opponent and just waste even more advantage or resources from your opponent's side of the field, which is great. So either they damage deny you and you can just sit back, relax, and just go value town, or they do not damage deny you and you can just drop another nuclear bomb on them and just go ham. Now, also an interesting thought is that you don't have to sit on the old Referaide to use the skill. You can also just have this as your Vanguard, attack with the Vanguard while just attacking with your rearguards normally, and then after that, once you attack with all your rearguards, you can rewrite herself again for the 2 CB if you want to go that route. That scenario means you have less rearguard swings, but instead of a free CB combo, it's just 2 CB. That's potentially also an option, but keep in mind you'll have less force markers, so the potential bomb is less explosive, but it's still an extra Vanguard attack nonetheless. Now, with the Bermuda Triangle cards discussed, let's take a look at the Angel Feather cards because we have more pure Celestial support cards. And we start off with this great one, which is Nursing Celestial Narelle. And Narelle has the effect on a rearguard circle at the start of your main phase. If you have a Vanguard with Celestial in its card name, cost, put this unit into your damage zone, draw a card, choose a face-up grade 2 or less card from your damage zone, and put it into your soul. So it's a bit convoluted, but basically what it comes down to is that a rearguard on the field removes itself, gives you soul, and then you draw a card. So you don't lose out on value, but you do generate a soul in the process. And this grade 1 goes into your damage zone, so if you have another copy in your hand, that means you set up your damage zone for your Romeo turn, because that whole Romeo engine works with the fact that you have the same units on the field that are also face up in your damage zone, so you can restun them or get more value off it. So this also sets up, but more importantly, it's a cycle that gives you soul. And soul is very important for Angel Feathers because a lot of powerful skills cost soul. So this is a great card that basically fuels that. But the only issue that I have with this particular effect is that it's at the start of your main phase, so that means it needs to survive your opponent's turn. So against any control deck, this skill will probably never activate. So that's a bit of an issue, but if you're up against a non-control deck or a deck that doesn't have any control options or any removal potential, then yeah, pretty nice. But it also has another effect, which is act in damage zone once a turn. So basically her first skill can fuel this, or at least sets up the condition for this. Once a turn, cost Soulless 1, search your deck for up to 1 card with Celestial and different card name than any face-up card in your damage zone, put it into your damage zone, and shuffle your deck. If you put a card, put this card into your soul. So again, very nice synergy with her own skill, because basically her first skill will put herself into the damage zone and gives you a soul, and then you can immediately use the same skill because that was at the beginning of your turn, now it's your main phase. You can now immediately use her skill to soul blast the card you just put into the soul to get a new Celestial card into your damage zone that then sets up your field plays or your combo plays, and then she will go towards the soul, which means at the end of the whole riddle, you went +1 soul and you set up another card in your damage zone that will combo off with your field. Which is great. Oh, and you draw a card as well while you do that. This, for a Celestial deck, sounds like a really good grade 1. So yeah, I think this is going to be a staple card for the Celestial engine. I might be wrong here, but just looking at this skill, pretty damn nice. But then on top of that, we also have a grade 2, which is Emergency Celestial Danielle. And Danielle has the effect, although when this unit is placed on a Vanguard circle or Rearguard circle from hand, very important, from hand, cost, discard a card from your hand, search your deck for up to 1 card with the same card name as any face-up card in your damage zone, call to the Rearguard circle, and shuffle your deck. If you call the unit without Celestial in its card name, counterblast 2. Counterblast 1 if your damage zone has 1 face-up card. So basically, you resolve the skill as much as possible. Now this is interesting in 2 different ways. First off, it's a bit the reverse type of skill that we've seen so far, because most cards in the Celestial archetype, or at least the support cards, copy a card that's already on the field and puts a card then in a damage zone. But this is the other way around. You copy a card that's in a damage zone and call it to the field. It's still the same setup that you're doing, which is good for the whole Romeo engine, but it's the interesting way that this is a bit of reverse. Now, the other thing about the skill is that it can actually search out any card. Now, yes, you need to counterblast 2, but any good Angel of Feather player knows, or anybody that's familiar with the nation or clan, should I say, knows that it can countercharge very effectively. So even though you might want to call something that's not with the Celestial name, there is a good enough engine that you can still, at the end of the turn or maybe 2 turns, recoup the losses of the 2 counterblasts you had to force to be paid. So honestly, not a bad card in a generic sense, but I think this is a really good card for the Celestial engine as a whole, because she has the name, of course, but she also works very nicely with what you're trying to do with the engine itself. But that brings us to the new grade 3, which honestly is a very nice spicy tech choice slash finisher depending on what your stance is for this card. Because here we have the brand new grade 3 Cleanup Celestial Romeo Reverse. And Romeo Reverse has the effects on a Vanguard circle. At the start of your battle phase, countercharge 1, which to some extent can negate the cost that we just paid for the grade 2, then lock all of your rearguards with different card names than any face-up cards in your damage zone. Then, for every 2 of your rearguards, choose one of your opponent's rearguards, retire it, and this unit gets power plus 20k until the end of turn. So this honestly is not a bad skill, and this is probably one of the more powerful self-lock skills we've seen so far, because so far every reverse unit that locks itself actually screws with your potential multi-tech plays or your combo plays, like we've seen with the Neo Nectar one that needs to lock standing units, or with what we see with Epic Buster, which also negates all the attacks that you're doing with your rearguards, which kind of sucks. But in this case, you can actually play around it, because Romeo Reverse has the same type of playstyle as the original Romeo, where you want to have the same units on the field as the units in your damage zone, because the original Romeo allows you to restand those units so you could come with 5 attacks. In this case, you get rewarded by, not only will you have a counter charge every single turn, or I believe it needs to Soul Blast to get the counter charge, this is just for free, but on top of that, you can potentially pop 2 of your opponent's rearguards for free every single turn, and Romeo could get like 20 to 40k power for free. So you could have like a 52k Vanguard for almost doing nothing, or just doing the game plan you were supposed to do, which honestly isn't bad. But then it also has another effect, which basically makes it a very spicy tag that could potentially be a nice finisher in specific scenarios, because she has the effect on a Vanguard circle. When this unit attacks, costs Soul Blast 1 grade 3. Now, some may say this is really bad or very slow. Keep in mind, this can be used as a finisher, so you can ride this during the late game. But also, Angel Feathers has a lot of grade 3s that just goes towards the soul, and they can activate during the battle phase. So you can attack with those preemptively, then it goes to the soul, and then you can use this skill to immediately Soul Blast them. So that's something we need to keep in mind here. Then, for doing that, this unit gets drive plus 1 until the end of battle, so triple drive, which isn't bad. Your opponent may counterblast 2. If they did not counterblast 2 until the end of the battle, when your opponent would call cards from their hand to the Guardian Circle, they must call the same number of cards as the same number of cards in your damage zone or more at the same time. So this is like a supercharged Battledore effect. And yes, your opponent can counterblast 2 to negate this, but that's quite a heavy cost, because that means they can potentially survive this turn, but how much can they do by that turn as they just lost 2 counterblasts? Like, if that's the last 2 counterblasts they have, and it's like a counterless combo deck that needs at least one counterless to do something, they just shot themselves in the foot to just survive, and now they have probably a very vanilla turn. But in the scenario they cannot pay the counterless, so aka a very late game scenario, you could have a Vanguard with the potential Battledore effect of 5 cards. So they need to guard with 5 cards to just guard in general. So in a scenario where your opponent has 4 cards in hand, you can just write this card, use the effect, and they cannot guard your Vanguard attack. And you swing with triple drive, so if they are like at 4 damage, you're gonna play 12 crits because it's a protect deck, most likely. So it's very likely you can hit a crit at that point, especially with the deck filtering Celestials is doing with all the searching and whatnot. That's actually pretty terrifying. And I know some people might think this is a worse card than the original Romeo, because the original Romeo can attack for 5 times in a somewhat similar setup as both cards tend to do. And yes, 5 attacks in a lot of scenarios is probably better than this Battledore type of effect, because this also needs setup that you need to be at 5 damage. But a very important thing to keep in mind is that in some scenarios, 5 attacks, depending of course the size of those numbers as well, might not actually take a lot of shield from your opponent's hand. Like if they're at 4, maybe they can take a hit, so that's at least 1 attack you can negate, and then they have to only guard 4 attacks. And depending on the numbers, they could guard like with 1 card if they have to hide shield value or some type of defensive skill that come into play, because we see some clans with more defensive options. Like for example, the new Kagero Lawkeeper. Like Lawkeeper can screw with your multi-attacks, because they can just remove your field, and then what are you going to do with the old Romeo? You're not going to reset anything. In that, at the very least, Reverse can still have her effect, because that Battledore effect isn't conditioned around your field. It's just a Vanguard skill, and if you're able to solve, that's a great free. So that's a thing to keep in mind with these new defensive type of skills. But another scenario where this card can be insanely powerful and potent is if you're up against a protect deck, or you're up against a deck that just drawn into multiple perfect guards, and they have like 7 or 8 cards in hand. What are you gonna do in that scenario with, even if you have 5 attacks? They can probably guard every single attack, and you're not gonna win that turn. At the very least, Romeo Reverse can be your ticket to win that. It can be your window of opportunity. Because if they have a lot of perfect cards in hand, that means if they have like 8 cards in hand, and 4 of those or 3 of those are perfect guards, they have to waste probably at least a perfect guard in the 5 cards they need to guard with to even stop this attack. And if they want to guarantee the guard and use the perfect guard, that's 6 cards out of their hand of the 8. So they only have 2 cards left, and let's say they didn't use the perfect guard, they just thrown 1 in to meet the condition. They have only 3 cards left. If those are the perfect guards, that means you have 3 cards left to guard your other 2 rearguard swings. And as soon as you have triple drive and you can filter a lot, it's likely that you will hit triggers. And then the question is, can they actually guard those attacks after they just wasted all those shield value? Probably not if the scenario if the situation is right. And that's, for me personally, is the value of this card, is that it is a nice option for the deck that allows you to do a different play than just a generic 5 swing deck. Because now also in the scenario where you brick and you cannot set up your field and you cannot get the optimal play, and this card is still a card that can pressure for at least a couple of cards every single turn if they don't want to die. Because even if they're at like 3 or 4, are you going to take the chance against a protect deck that just runs 12 crits, that has triple drive on their Vanguard attack? Is that a chance you want to take? I mean, I have lost more than enough games on a no guard at 3 damage on a triple drive stride, and this is basically the same, and they just hit double critical. But now, if you want to guard it, it's no longer just perfect guard. You need to waste a lot of cards from hand. And because of the Battledore effect, even if you cannot fulfill for her first ability, so you don't get the power, you don't mind. Because a 12k, or maybe like a booster behind, like maybe 22k attack, is more than enough to still force like 4 or 5 cards from their hand, because probably intercepting won't be enough. Which is pretty nice if I'm gonna be honest. But hey, that's just my opinion. I'm very curious what you guys' opinions are. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new Referaide rock card, as well as the generic support card for Bermuda Triangle, and the new Celestial Engine support wave for Romeo, aka Romeo Reverse. I'm personally very excited and interested in trying these cards out and see what type of options they bring to their respective builds and potentially to the clan as a whole. Because an interesting thing about Romeo Reverse is that You can just play her as a support grade 3 in any deck for her second effect, because that second effect doesn't need any setup except for a grade 3 assault, but you can just ride her during the late game and you need to have 4 or 5 damage. Again, you can just ride her during the late game. Also, there's a premium application where you can use her with this stride that gives you like 8 damage potentially, and then you can use this to force your opponent to guard with like 6-7 cards, so can potentially also be a premium finisher. Don't know how valid that is. It's an option. But again, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by lovely patrons over at patreon.com/insider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/insider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!